My name is Eddy Elzarian. Some people call me Ed, Edward. I don't mind. You can call me whatever you want. I've lived in Colorado for about, 7 or 8 years now. I lived in Manitou for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then I moved up to Denver for a year and worked at a bakery, and then moved back, and I've been here and into a different house in Manitou again. And so when I first moved to Colorado, didn't know anything about mushrooms. I kind of had this abstract thought about like what it would be like to actually find one in the woods, because I used to live in California when I grew up, and I would go to the Sierras, but I never saw a mushroom. And then the idea of seeing a morel, I didn't know what it would look like in the wild if I saw it, so I had no concept in my head. Anyway, so my neighbor across the street from me was Mike Essem. Some of you guys know him. He was the president. I don't know if he is this year or not now, but he's been very involved in the club. And when I moved here, he was president of the club at that time. And so my cousin lived next door, and he was really active and social, and he would go out and garden, and then Mike would come over and give him some mushrooms from like chanterelles and boletes. And then my cousin didn't cook, so he gave it to me. And so I started cooking them. And then I was like, I got to meet this guy, because these mushrooms are something that I've never seen before, and they were good. And so then he started telling me, everything about. And then I finally went out and started looking for mushrooms on my own. Wasn't successful a whole bunch of times. And then I went with him and saw a whole bunch. And then, it's kind of a great thing. So I got into mushrooms that way. And then I volunteered at the Telluride Mushroom Festival in 2016. And then I volunteered the last every year since, except this year I volunteered, but I worked at the Fungi magazine booth. So I've learned a lot there. If you have a chance, you should go to the Telluride Mushroom Festival for sure. It has. I learned more in the 3 days there, going on forays and standing in the identification tent and stuff, about mushrooms than I'd had known in the first 2 years or whatever I was learning on my own. So anyway, so I'm here to talk about mushrooms and health. My dad's a pharmacist, so I kind of have an exposure to the medical field through that, and just by research and stuff like that. I have a degree in math, so I like to read a lot of really intricate papers. So anyway, so that's what it's kind of like when you're reading research papers about health too. There's a lot of math about the statistics and stuff. So I want to talk today about, this is what was happening last year. I'll say that. So this is kind of a cool mushroom I took a picture of that popped up maybe a few years last year in my cactus pot in the front of my house. And it's called Leucocoprinus birnbaumii, and it's a common mushroom that's found it grows in like pots and stuff a lot. Yeah, and so I think Brian can probably attest to this because he's the person that gets the toxicology calls. But it's one that people call for a lot and say, or my child ate this because they were walking around and ate it, or the animal ate it. And it can be mildly poisonous, just upset stomach and stuff. So I took some pictures, and I actually collected this and dried it, and I took it to the Botanical Gardens in Denver, and it's in as a specimen now. So yeah, you could do that with little tiny mushrooms you find in your house too. And they help me identify it. Okay, so first we're talking about health and mushrooms. So what is health? Well, the definition I looked up on Wikipedia, it said the state of being free from illness or injury. Okay, well then you got to find out what illness and injury are. So it's being without illness, which is a disease of sickness or affected body or mind or spirit. Disease, period, of sickness. So that's kind of abstract. So really, we just have to, it's a feeling you get. And then injury is harm or damage. So generally, health is kind of abstract. It's hard to understand. And it's just normal. I think it's when people say they don't feel bad. So it's like an absence of something. Anyway. So, what are mushrooms? In this case, the mushrooms can have various implied definitions when used by novice, amateur, expert, and even professional micro-focused people. So this is kind of something that's been a problem with our culture, is that we don't know much about mushrooms. So when you start talking about mushrooms, it's new vocabulary for people usually. And it's also an abstract idea that we haven't had words for, or you even learn about in school. So it's kind of hard to communicate. with. So in the past, I've gotten angry or been frustrated because like I bought stuff, I bought like tinctures, health tinctures from Paul Stamets. He has a line called Host Defense, and they have it at Natural Grocer. And it used to say, like some of them were, the only ingredients were myceliated brown rice, which is great, it's mycelium. So they grew the mushroom on brown rice that's edible, and then they ground it up into powder, or I think what they do is they freeze dry it for him, and then grind it into a fine powder and put it into pills. And you take those pills, and it's got good things for your immune system, maybe. But it said this is a mushroom product. And from our traditional understanding, it usually just means fruiting body only, right? Like when you say mushroom, it's kind of like when you say flower, right? When you say flower, this is like an analogy, when you say flower, that means the flower part of the plant. But people have been marketing mushrooms as the whole thing, right? Mycelium is like the plant. That's the thing. I'm sorry, I should introduce what is mycelium. Mycelium, so when mushrooms grow, they grow as hyphae, which are tubes. And you guys are part of the club, so you probably know that. But so they grow like tubes, and the tip of the tube keeps growing longer. And that's the actual body of the fungus. That's where a lot of the stuff is going on. That's where the DNA is figuring out what enzymes to make and to digest the food around it. And then it does the same thing as animals do cellularly, but it digests the food outside of the body in a little bubble right in front of the hypha. And the tip is called a Spitz Incorpor. And I'll talk about that a little later. But so it exudes the stuff, and then it picks which enzymes to put into the little bubble in front of it, and then that enzyme dissolves things and digests things in front of it, and then that stuff goes back into the hypha. So it's like an animal kind of, but it does the digestion outside of its body. And so the mycelium is just the part that grows on the substance that it's trying to consume, which is its food. So in general, what we're talking about are saprobic, mushrooms that grow, or fungus that grows on dead material, like leaves and dead wood. Stuff that's already lived before and now died and been just sitting there. So there's a lot of mushrooms that just do that. And there's a lot of other mushrooms that do different stuff, other stuff too, but we're talking about that. And he's selling the mycelium, but on his box, he wrote mushroom product. So I was reading, so today I was looking at his product box, and it doesn't say that anymore. It now says, this is a mushroom product, it's made of mycelium and fruit body. So I guess Paul Stamets, or whoever is in charge of his box labels, has said, the public knows enough about mushrooms now that we can start using the correct terms, and we don't have to say something that doesn't make sense. So now it says mycelium. So more people are learning about what mycelium is. And mycelium is actually something that can be medicinal for us. So it's got potential. It's made of a lot of good stuff. And some of the stuff that's in the mushroom fruit body is actually also in the mycelium. So it can be a new food product possibly that we can make. And it's really just fermented grains or rice or stuff. So when we talk about health effects, it is important to use more specific words to talk about the anatomy of the fungi. So like I said, why don't we actually talk about the stuff? So at least on the box now they say mycelium. But there's a big difference between mycelium and fruiting body in the chemicals that are in it, so it's going to have different health effects. I think we need to do more research to learn more about it because we don't know much at all about mushroom chemistry much. But I'm going to talk about how you can find research articles to figure out what is going on with the different stuff. But okay, then there's cultivated versus wild mushrooms. So mushrooms that grow in the wild. There's lots of types of mushrooms that grow in the wild, more than we know. They say we know 15 to 20% of the actual wild fungus that's actually been identified by science and named and stuff. So there's a lot of unknowns out in the real world. Possibly unknown types of life that we don't know genetically how they work. But cultivated versus wild, so certain mushrooms can be cultivated that are wild. Certain wild mushrooms cannot be cultivated because they grow in a weird way that is hard, like mycorrhizal, for instance, a mushroom that is connected to the tree root and not breaking down dead material outside much to get its actual carbon, like the sugars and stuff that it needs to live. So they're connected. So a lot of the actual gourmet mushrooms that we have around here, like boletes, the porcinis, and boletes and chanterelles and Dominita muscaria that grow here. Those are all mycorrhizal, and they grow connected to the tree. And they can't live without the tree. So we can't just grow them and sell them, because we would have to figure out how to make the environment as complex as it is up there, and we don't understand it now. We'd have to figure out how to reproduce that to grow them in our farm. And that doesn't happen. So we're really, for cultivated, we're talking about stuff that is saprobic, stuff that eats dead matter. And those can be cultivated. And then there's a big difference also between if you find that cultivated mushroom in the wild. So if you go out the Bear Creek and go down the creek, there's a lot of dead cottonwood trees, and those trees have Pleurotus, I don't know which one it is, Pulmonarius. Oh, we have, Pulmonarius, because it grows on cottonwood, which is a part of the poplar family, which is a Pulmonarius group. So then it all connects. But yes, so Pleurotus pulmonarius is the oyster that grows on the cottonwood trees in the creek here, and they're wild if you go pick one of those. And sometimes there's a big group, you can actually pick it and find a great meal and like cook them up like fried chicken or something. And they're great. But the medicinal value of those versus if you collected it and then took a tissue off that mushroom and then kept that mushroom that you collected growing on new food, gave it a petri dish with agar or liquid culture and grew it, it would have a different medicinal content based on what you fed it. And so there's a big difference between even the cultivated ones that you can cultivate and them in the wild. And also, like I said, saprobic versus mycorrhizal, I kind of talked about that, which is these are the ones that can be cultivated and are wild also, and then mycorrhizal are not cultivatable, but they're wild. And they're very medicinal, like boletes the porcini has a lot of vitamin D in it, and I think I have a slide for that. Okay, so let's talk about health research and fungi. Well, there's not much, I would say. A lot of the health research that's been done on fungi, if there's actually stuff done in the United States, has been based off of it as a pathogen. So we usually go at it from an agricultural standpoint and then say, what's going wrong with the thing I'm trying to grow? And the only research you do is figuring out how that fungus is affecting the thing that you're trying to grow as a crop. A lot of it isn't, it's not done on actual trying to figure out if they have health benefits. So there's a lot of research done, but it's done in China. And so when we talk about different types of research articles, there are different ways of conducting the research. So one of the highest rated one, I think you guys have probably all seen this, and heard this before, but the best type of research article is a double-blind, placebo-controlled study on humans. So if we were to take, say, mushrooms and feed them to humans, and then somehow have a thing that looks like a mushroom that's a placebo and feed it to them, and they didn't know. I don't know if that's possible, but I think there's a few studies that have been done. So, and then find out if it's having positive health effects. That's the best type of study. The next one is when you take basically data from humans on a larger scale that's just been collected from surveys or things like that. And those are called epidemiological human-based studies. And there's one that I just found and printed out from 2019 from Singapore, and it talks about how they took 663 participants aged 60 and above, and they're in Singapore, and they had them eat 2 portions per week, and they were testing their something called mild cognitive impairment, which is this, it's like a medical condition for aging that is pre-dementia. So if you have mild cognitive development, they call it pre-dementia, so that's what they were testing these individuals for. And they found, there was a couple other studies they said that were done before, and some was in Japan, that showed positive correlation to eating mushrooms and less mild cognitive impairment. And this study also found the same thing. So there are a few studies.
What type of mushroom were they using?
This just says mushrooms, so I think I don't know what they were feeding them. I wonder if I need to dig in.
Probably Hericium.
Yeah, I think it might have been Hericium because back here, oh yeah, because it talks about here that they said they observed the correlation between mushrooms and reduced odds of MCI in our study sample. It's biologically plausible because certain components in mushrooms have hericinones, erinacines, which those two chemicals are present in Hericium, which is lion's mane. So those are the two focus chemicals that are really hot right now. Hericinone and erinacine, and they're in Hericium, and they're named after it. Hericium erinaceus is the name for the wild lion's mane mushroom.
You got that on Google Scholar?
Yes, this is all through Google Scholar. And I'm about to talk about how to find and download articles through Google Scholar. This article is the association between mushroom consumption and mild cognitive impairment, a community-based cross-section study in Singapore. And it's 2019, so if you were to just limit your search to 2019, it'll probably come up if you just search for mild cognitive impairment and mushrooms. Okay, so then we talk about there's a lot of these studies. When you start searching for research that's been done with mushrooms, there are a ton of studies that are done on mice and rats, and they're done in China, and they prove cool stuff, like that the mice can, like with Hericium, the lion's mane mushroom, they had a study that proved that it could regrow after they broke the mice's arm. It would help regrow the nerves. But there's lots of studies throughout that. So I'm going to show you how to find studies, and you can search for them. And then there's a lot of those to get. It's just harder to find the epidemiological, human-based, and then the double-blind placebo. But if you search for them, the ones that are there will come up. And then the lowest one is stuff that's been done in test tube or in a petri dish. And there's a lot of those too, where they're just testing different, some of it's all on chemical processes that I don't know about because I'm not a biological study. Yeah, biochemist. But those do tell you something, like they can prove that they can kill a lot of cancers with different compounds that are coming from mushrooms and stuff. There are some studies that, I found one study, I didn't bring it, but if you search for cancer, there's one about how, there might be a couple actually, about how different mushrooms have been used to supplement traditional cancer treatments. So like the side effects and the lack of immune system, maybe from taking actual radiation, you can take, there's different studies that you'll find that say that mushroom supplementation helps get through the radiation and make it more effective.
Paul Stamets has a story about his mother.
Yeah, there's an article that he published too, you'll find through Google Scholar. Yeah, his mother was like stage 4 with like really bad, and he talks about how she took a lot of high dose of turkey tail, Trametes versicolor mushroom supplements while she was doing the traditional breast cancer, but she couldn't do she did like a traditional breast cancer treatment, but it was like one for elderly people because she couldn't take the main one or something like that. But she's fine now and got healed, so.
She's the only one in her group.
She's the only one that
survived because she's the only one that took the mushroom supplement with the radiation.
Really? That's really cool. So so I think he's funding some studies like on that. And you know, I did this talk last year when I searched for research articles, and I couldn't find much that was done on people. And then this year there's a couple more that pop up from 2019. So we're going to have more research coming up. So if you keep checking, we'll have more.
What's the guy's name?
Paul Stamets. Stamets. And he's the mushroom guy, so he's all over the internet. He's got a lot of podcasts and a lot of YouTube videos and stuff.
And a movie coming
He's also the psilocybin expert, if you're interested in magic mushrooms.
And a movie coming out on October 11th.
Oh yes, is that the Fantastic Fungi, which they've shown at the Telluride Mushroom Festival the last 2 years, and it's going on a tour right now, right, around the country, getting premiered. And it's an amazing. He worked with Leo. Is it Leo Schwartz? Louis Schwartz. And so they collaborated on this awesome mushroom movie. And check it out. It's called Fantastic Fungi.
And it's coming out.
It's touring.
This last weekend.
It's still screening.
Yeah, so there's a website and you'll be able to see which cities it's going to be in. And then I don't know how they're going to release it after that, but it might say on the website.
I posted the info on Facebook, on our Facebook page.
Sweet. Okay, so fungi in health research. What are some types of research and how reliable are they at providing true predictions? Wait, this is what I think I just showed that. I'm sorry. Okay. Here, let's talk about finding a research paper to read. So, there's something called Google Scholar. So if you're on Google and you type in Scholar, it'll take you to Google Scholar, and it searches lots of different journals. And it's a great way to search. There's other searches too, and you can ask a librarian about that and how to find other stuff, but this is great. I just use this generally. And so when you want to search for an article, you want to type a topic in. So I picked a topic that I knew would find one article. So this is a cool Cordyceps Sinensis study that was done in let me see. Well, you can tell it's old because it says Cordyceps Sinensis. Kind of, which is a species, and cordyceps are so complicated now that it's actually a good idea to do research on the genetics of cordyceps, because now they've found that there's a lot of different organisms that live within this one organism, that it reproduces multiple ways, like up to 8 to 10 times, different ways. And so, anyway, this is an older article, but the reason I picked it is because it's actually on real people. And so basically it was a study done on older men and seeing if they could help anyway, let's talk about how to find it. So you type it in this and you hit search, and then it comes up. So because I put in such a specific title, only one answer came up. And then you click on the article. Usually there's a lot of articles that come up, and you can use over here, you can click on what range of time the articles come from, so that you can limit it to recent articles, or you'll get sometimes stuff popping up from the 90s, or with mushrooms, about 90s is when the oldest stuff is, maybe some in the 80s, but you don't get a lot of old articles. But if you want new stuff, you click on new stuff. So anyway, and that came up, and then I clicked on it, and it took me to the journal website for this article, and here's something where the abstract is, and so let's say you want to get the article. If I scroll down here, this is the bottom of the page. You don't get the article yet. So I click on View Article, and then this is what comes up. You got a paywall where you got to say, in order to view the article, you need to pay $51. There's a lot of different journals that have paywalls, and if you're wealthy, you should pay it, maybe. And then you get the article, and then you can download it. But if you aren't, there's something on the article called the DOI. And this is new since we've had the internet, I think. Maybe it was something else before. They probably had a different idea. I shouldn't say anything about that. I don't know. But there's something called the DOI, and all research articles get a DOI, and that's how you find the article. And so we go back to the page. This is where the DOI was when I pulled it up. And if you can see in here, it says doi.org. And then there's another one down here, and this is a link to click, and it'll bring up the paywall so you can pay and get it. But that is the address for the article, and that's unique to that article. Then there was this lady, Alexandra Elbakian. I think she's Russian, or she's Armenian, and then from Russia. And she, I think, was at Harvard. This explains what happened. But she found a way to get the articles without having to pay. And she created in 2011, and she had a lot of people asking her about them. And so in 2011, she created this website called Sci-Hub. And it's basically an illegal website. She's been sued a few times, but I don't think she's lost. You should look in, if you're interested in the ethics of it, you can look into it. But she's been sued because so basically what happens is if you take the DOI and you click on this website, they shut it down a lot, but these are the different mirrors where you can get to the website on the Wikipedia page. This is from the Wikipedia page. If you click on this, it takes you to the Sci-Hub website, and there's just a search bar. It looks like a Google web page, kind of. Then you put the DOI in there and hit search, and probably, 19 times out of 20, the thing just pops up. So you can pretty much look for really important information and be poor still. So anyway, That's how you can do your own research and not have to pay $1 million. And then the abstract is, if you have ever seen articles, there's an abstract. That's the thing that you can, it's a summary of the article. Sometimes, like in the one that we saw before, it has a little bit more than, it has a summary of some of the actual sections of the article. But it's something you get before you have to pay, and you can see if it's an interesting article. So here was the abstract when I pulled it up. This one has a little bit of each section, so it even has some results and some conclusion. But it doesn't have the whole conclusion. Sometimes it's just a little paragraph that's got like some of the, if it's relevant or what their findings were, if it was positive or negative outcomes. And it's just a way of, that's abstract. I'm sure you guys have heard of that. And then there's the main part, the conclusion and the other main parts. The statistical analysis is important, and I'm trying to learn more about that because that will tell you a lot about whether the thing is relevant or not. If we don't know about statistics, people can lie with statistics to us, and we can not know, but they're complicated, and I need to know more about that so that I can actually do a better job of making my own judgment on whether the articles are legitimate or not. The mechanisms they use in the lab, so that a lot of times in the article it will have a section that talks about the different processes it used to actually do the testing. And it will say the stuff that's going on in the way that they do the experiment, and so that you can reproduce it. That stuff is important because if you don't know how to do any of the experimentation, that's really good information, right? So you can learn a lot by just looking at articles and studying them and kind of going back and learning the processes backwards. And then a lot of times in these articles, at the beginning when they're introducing the subject, they'll talk about other articles, so they'll summarize other work, and you get a really good, and then they'll cite the other work too. So you can just keep going back and finding out all the relevant research that's built up to this work that might be relevant. And then in the conclusion, a lot of times it tells you whether it's success or failure. So if you go, I generally go to the conclusion first because I want to know what happened. And it's a research article, so it's not like you're missing any of the story. Okay. So this was the conclusion of that article, actually. I found it, and I posted it on here. So that was a study that was done with these Chinese older men, and it said that, in addition, so they need to do more studies to find out, but they do support the belief long held in China that Cordyceps Sinensis was a potential to improve exercise and capacity. So they need to do more studies. But one thing that's cool, that's new, that's not part of this, is that a lot of research has been done on Cordyceps Militaris, which is also a Cordyceps mushroom. This is actually not even called Cordyceps Sinensis anymore. I think it's called Ophiocordyceps or one of those. It's got a different, they changed the genus name. The only real, I think Cordyceps Militaris is a type species for Cordyceps genus. So it won't change. And Cordyceps Militaris is a really cool mushroom. I want to bring a picture up if I can get the internet going. This is a mushroom that's cool because a lot of research has been done on that Cordyceps sinensis, and it's based off of chemicals that are also in this Cordyceps militaris. And Cordyceps militaris has been found, it's in the wild in the United States also. We don't have Cordyceps sinensis. Cordyceps sinensis traditionally was Yartsagumbe, and that was the name in China, and it's the Tibetan mushroom that grows on a ghost moth larvae. And it's harvested during the yak harvesting season or something, I think, and they go above the tree line, and they use a wooden dowel or a stick to stick it in the ground near this black thing that's sticking out like a black Cheeto out of the ground, and then it pops out, and you have to have the caterpillar connected to the mushroom, and then it's worth a lot, like $50,000 a pound in China. But these mushrooms have the same chemicals that these Cordyceps militaris have. And there's a guy named William Padilla Brown in, I think he's moved back to Pennsylvania, but he found some in 2016 and started cultivating it. And there's companies now that are popping up selling it cultivated in the United States. There's a lot of cultivation in China also, but it's hard to trust what's happening in China if, I don't know, sometimes there could be contamination and pollution, so it'd be nice to have it from the United States. So this is what the mushroom looks like. So this is a cultivated stuff. That's in China, I think. They're cultivating it and they're growing it in jars. And this is what it looks like in the wild when you find it. And it's a little tiny mushroom, like maybe this big. And they find a lot in the East Coast. It's in the Appalachian Mountains, a lot more than Colorado. It's really going to be interesting if you find it in Colorado. But he cultivated it and took some of these techniques like these and has a book, and he's about to release his second book on how to grow them in the United States. And so you can grow this at home and have medicine that is as good as the $50,000 a pound medicine in China.
What's his name?
William Padilla Brown. I can bring up a video of him finding one.
We need to have him out and speak again.
Yeah, he came and spoke about in 2013 or 14.
14.
Maybe it was 15. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, 20. That was way wrong.
2 years ago, he's 17. He's missing time.
His on YouTube, it's called Apex Grow. That's his YouTube channel. I think he sells them also if you're interested in buying.
He's grower.
Oh, you're right.
I didn't come out.
Okay. So he's got videos of him. There's a couple new videos. There we go. Okay, so here's a cool video of them finding it in the wild. I just want to show you that real quick. Anyway, this is a really cool mushroom that you can grow at home.
And how do you get started with?
Well, he has if you go and look up on, oh man, it's not showing up full screen, but,
I haven't there yet.
thanks. That's big enough. So he published a book in 2016 after he found the first one, and you can order that book either on his ebook. I think it's called, so I don't know if there's any sound, but it's not very, it's quick though. He's just going to start showing you the mushroom real quick. You can go on his, I think it was called Mycosymbiot, was his website, and you can buy the book, and it explains how to cultivate them. And it has how to grow them in a jar.
They sell kits too, don't they?
And they might sell kits on it now. There's more people growing it.
Don't you sell kits?
Oh, no, I don't. I wish I did.
But for other mushrooms?
I was working on trying to, and then I never got it going. So look, this is the wild one, and he's pulling it up from underneath, and it's growing on like a moth cocoon. And then so what he did with the first one he found was he cut it into little pieces and then took tissue from the inside that's sterile and put them on petri dishes. And then I think he did 12, and one out of the 12 grew. And then that he turned into a bunch of jars that he grew on rice and some other stuff like, I think he puts, in order to mimic bug casings, he'll put protein from yeast. So like they have that brewer's yeast that you use in vegan cooking. He put some of that in it. And it's really medicinal. And so that's that. And then I'll go back and show you this. What happened?
He's right there at the bottom.
Okay, so what's happening? Sorry. There's a Well, here, I'll just go quickly through this, okay, here. Okay, so here's some awesome things about mushrooms, and I think I'm biased, but I think it's apparent that mushrooms are a kingdom of life, right? And they grow in the wild. They're similar to animals with cells, cellularly. A lot of the same chemicals. So the very few, actually, that do attack us as pathogens are hard to kill with medicines because the things that hurt the fungus hurt us. We're very similar to them. So it's very good that not very many of them attack us, but the ones that do are problems, like athlete's foot, and then there's some candidas. There's a new one called Candida aurea, and it's horrible. It might be a new superbug. But generally those, anyway, mushrooms are great, I think, and they're very high in fiber. They are 90% water, and then the rest is mostly chitin, and the part that doesn't break down, that ends up being fibrous when you eat it. And the fiber is actually made of, the cell walls of the fiber have large sugars in them, complex sugars, the complex B and A sugars. And so when they actually do break down, they become good things that can go into our blood and stimulate our T cells and keep our immune system actually active. So they're a great food to eat because the fiber's good, and then whatever the fiber breaks down to is good. Comparing to traditional meat, mushrooms are like 100 grams of mushrooms has a lot less calories than 100 grams of meat. So, and they have about a very high satiation level. So if our country's having an obesity epidemic, if we replace meat or traditional meat, some of the traditional meat, with mushroom products that are satiating and make us feel full, it will be a way to, in the mass amount, take the statistics down, right? People will stop eating, will be eating less calories even though they feel like they're eating the same. So it's a great option to solve some of the nation's problems in that way for health. Vitamin D. So this has been found out for a few years now that there's a vitamin D in mushrooms. The thing is, there's a couple articles. There's a good article that I tried to get in here, and I didn't have time. I didn't get it in there, but it talks about. It's a 2019 article, and it talks about it breaks down vitamin D in the mushrooms, and it talks about cultivated mushrooms versus wild mushrooms. And cultivated mushrooms do not have very much vitamin D, but wild mushrooms do. And it happens because when the sun hits a chemical called, so here's a little, I took a little tiny bit, an excerpt from the article, but I didn't get the whole article in. But this is talking about some of what they found in the wild mushrooms fresh. So this says there were 3 to 30 micrograms of vitamin D2 in 100 grams of per fresh weight, and that was in chanterelles, Cantharellus tubiformis. I think this was from Holland or somewhere in Europe, Northern Europe, and this didn't come out very well. But this is some of the other mushrooms. So Cantharellus severius was I think 10.7, and Boletus edulis, which is porcini. We don't have that here, but we do have Boletus rubriceps, so I'd love to test that and see how much vitamin D is in that. But that has a really high amount, 58.7 micrograms. So eat a lot of boletes. A smaller amount was found in the Agaricus species. But I think I want to read a bit more about the article and see if they studied things that were in the shade versus in the sun. Because what happens is, there's a chemical called ergosterol, which this is also something that's really kind of cool. Fungi don't make cholesterol, but animals make cholesterol, and we need cholesterol. They make something called ergosterol. It's similar to cholesterol, but it's different, and it's in mushrooms and all fungi. And what happens is when the sun and the UV hit it, it turns into vitamin D. So, and this process the mushroom doesn't have to be actively growing. It can be a dried mushroom set in the sun, and it still has this chemical, and when the sun hits it, the process happens. So I think they talk in the article about using UV light to create more vitamin D in cultivated mushrooms. I think they're trying to do more research to figure out if we can do that. One of the big differences between the health benefits of cultivated mushrooms, one aspect of cultivated mushrooms versus wild mushrooms is, I think what we have to start learning is, when we cultivate mushrooms, we have to manipulate how we cultivate them so that the cultivation has medicinal value to it. Because there's stuff like selenium, which I didn't get a chance to put in here, but selenium is something that's very important for, it's a element that's important for us, and it's very important for pregnant women, and even more important for nursing women. And it's really high in Brazil nuts, but it's also possibly in cultivated mushrooms if we have selenium-rich food. So there's a lot of articles talking about different species of cultivated mushrooms growing on selenium-rich substrate and having selenium in your mushrooms. So we need to start looking at how we can grow mushrooms medicinally better. Anyway, it all breaks down and you end up getting D2, D3, and D4 based on if it keeps getting UV light. There's another thing that's really cool, and I think you guys, if you're interested in learning about why mushrooms are really helpful, there's a chemical that's in mushrooms called Ergo Thiamine. And what was the doctor that did the lecture at Telluride? Ken Kessenbrock? Dr. Ken Kessenbrock from CSU in Fort Collins gave a lecture at Telluride, and he talked about how ergothiamine is a substance that's in all fungi, or all fungi cells maybe, I think. And it's not something that's only in fruit bodies of mushrooms, the growing mushroom. It's actually in the mycelium also. So he's saying there's a lot of articles now proving that this is in pathways in our body, that our body needs it, but it's only in fungus. So it might be a new vitamin that is present, and it's possibly what is causing this positive effect from eating mushrooms in older people with their cognitive health. Because in the article that he was showing, it showed that lower levels of ergothiamine were present in older people. So maybe older people need to eat more mushrooms to keep themselves, to have this mushroom, or this chemical. And it might be something, since it's something that's not in us, but we need, that's what a vitamin is. So, how much time do I have? I haven't. Oh, I got a few minutes? Okay. So, here's something called, this is the Spitz Incorpor, which is a kind of a cool name. I just want to talk about it because this is what I was talking about earlier with the hypha. So here we have a hypha. This is what the mushroom body looks like, and it's really, really small. And there's something going on with the size of it and the element of H2O that causes physics that we don't understand and makes high pressure. They can create high pressure in here, up to 144 psi. And the walls are made of chitin, which is the same stuff that's lobster shells, and it's very strong. And then what happens is it grows longer, and as it's growing, there is a big bubble here that it creates. And it exudes things out of here. It creates enzymes and stuff back here in the process, and then it shoots them up to the front and then exudes it, and then the stuff is digested that it's touching, and then it goes back in. And it's kind of cool. And it's pretty amazing to learn about what's happening here, because it's kind of like if we could mimic this, we could make like really cool machines maybe, I don't know. But it gets high pressure, and then some of these cells end up having lots and lots of nuclei, like thousands of nuclei. And then the high pressure happens, and then somehow it can dissolve the walls here and grow more, and then keep the pressure from exploding. And that's how you see mushrooms push up through like cement or like asphalt. They have high pressure but grow real slow. So here's cordycepin. This is a chemical that's in cordyceps. And it's one of the ones that they attribute maybe some of the benefits to us, and that why it has actually energy production if you eat cordyceps. Because here's another chemical that's on our body that we need, and you might have heard of it. It's adenosine. But look how close it is. Basically, it's the same exact chemical, except this adenosine just has another hydroxy group right here, OH group, on this corner. So if there's a lot of this in cordyceps, adenosine is something that we really need because this is the pathway where we get our energy in our mitochondria. What happens is adenosine ends up getting a phosphorus group here, and then another phosphorus group, and then this phosphorus group breaks off, and then the energy that's released is the energy that our body makes. So all of our energy comes from this little bond, this oxygen bond breaking. And supposedly, possibly, there's actually adenosine in cordyceps also. So you're getting stuff that is the chemicals that are necessary for our cells to produce energy on this cellular level. So it's a little different than taking caffeine where it's stimulating you from an effect of maybe a receptor. This is actually giving your cells energy. And that's why cordyceps might be a really cool mushroom. So there's something really fast. This is the last thing. This is the current issue of Fungi magazine. And there's a cool article in here about chaga. And it's there's like 3 authors. One of them is Dr. Bug. They talk about different toxicology reports and anecdotal information they've got as experts getting called from medical problems that have happened from drinking chaga. And it's a really interesting article because they found, there's a bunch of stuff, it's worth getting in and reading, but it really is showing that some of these woody mushrooms that grow on wood, like that aren't edible, but they're medicinal, like reishi, Ganodermas, or Fomitopsis, and chaga, they can be high in oxalic acid, which I don't know exactly, but sometimes I guess that can cause problems in your blood, and there's certain times where other oxalates cause minerals to be leached out of your body. So some of these guys have been having problems that drink lots of chaga every day forever, then they get disease states. So you got to be careful if you could do some research if you have problems with oxalic acid. I think it can have problems with your kidneys and stuff too, but it can be a genetic thing for certain people. So they might not want to drink lots and lots of mushroom tea from chaga or maybe even reishi and stuff that are high in oxalic acid. These are just, the rest I have just some mushrooms pictures that I took.
Let's see.
Okay, these were at Lewis Creek. I think they're a species of Gumphidius. And they might be subroseous.
Sub-roses.
They might be edible.
They are.
And they might be very medicinal.
They are.
I don't know exactly, maybe, I think they talk about them in this book. This is a book that's really important too that is cool. It's by a guy, Robert Rogers. It's called The Fungal Pharmacy. It's more herbal based, so he has more, it's like, there's some science in it, but it's also got just like, from like a healer standpoint, like what these mushrooms have done and what he's observed and stuff. Okay, this is a cool mushroom. I don't know what it is. Panosobe or something? No, maybe Mycena. Oh, Robert Rogers.
Okay, thank you.
And then this is a book by Alex Dorr, and I don't know if he's got a new edition out, but so mushrooms, especially wild mushrooms that are connected to trees, the mycorrhizal mushrooms, they can accumulate metals and other things so that the things that are distributed throughout the ground, the mushrooms growing, the mycelium's growing through the ground, then when it grows the mushroom, sometimes it will funnel the heavy metals into the mushroom. So this book talks about mycoremediation, and that's a technique you can possibly use to get the stuff out of the ground, but you wouldn't want to eat those mushrooms. So I don't know, it's kind of complicated, and I don't know how depth it is, but you can get a book, some books that talk about which mushrooms accumulate which things, and then if you know stuff about the environment where you're picking, if it's high in that metal and that's something that accumulates it, and you don't want it, then you'll know not to get it. But otherwise, it's a complicated issue, and I don't know specifics to talk about. So this was a mushroom that I just took a picture of on a little foray in Manitou Springs, up Inniman Trail. And one day there were just a few mushrooms, so I put a couple pictures from this foray. I think this was a Mycena, but I didn't identify it. This is a Clatosavi gibba, and there were a couple of them in different stages. They're not particularly great, they smell kind of bad, and I don't think they're edible. And I think this was Carnosavi. I don't know. But this is a cool illustration of how you can take a picture and then dry them later and still be able to tell the anatomy of the gill connection. So you lay them down and then you can look at it after to identify what it was. after, because sometimes with little mushrooms, they don't look the same about 10 minutes after you pick it. So it's a good idea to take photos of the anatomy. These are some other mushrooms. I don't know what they were. I think, what's the nature website? iNaturalist identified them to,
What is it?
iNaturalist. It's a website, or it's an app that lets you take pictures of things, and it has a AI that can take the picture and try to identify it.
Oh, like Google Lens.
Yeah, kind of like that. I think it said Lentimulus. I don't know what it was. Brian might know, but who knows? I didn't identify it. This is a cool mushroom that I took up in Allen's Park above Boulder. It's called Xeramphilina campanella. They're really, really, really little, like this big. And it was very, very, very dry. There were no mushrooms anywhere. But this was growing in some moss right on the creek. And then I realized there's some sort of weird, like, ascomycete mushroom. It's even smaller. That's like a pinhead or something. And then these are a cool mushroom. Oh, that's the other thing for mushroom health. Okay, so we should do more gardening with mushrooms because it's easy. All you have to do is water it a lot, and mushrooms grow. So I took some, these are Stropharia rugosa annulata. I actually bought them a long time ago, I guess 2 years ago, from William Padilla Brown, the guy we were talking about. He was selling more species of mushrooms at the time in little syringes like this. You get a syringe like this in the mail, and it's full of liquid that has the mycelium growing in it, like it's like a broth with a little bit of sugar. And then you can inject pieces of mushroom in there, and it'll grow in 3 dimensions in the water. As long as you shake the water enough to get oxygen in it. But I ordered them, and then I grew it in jars. I injected that into like a liquid solution, and then I took that liquid solution and made more of the syringes, and then I grew it in, this is really, really old, but this is actually an oyster mushroom. But this was full of grain, and then you inject the mushroom in there, and then it grows on that. And then I took that and I put it with a bunch of sawdust and wood chips in a pile in my yard, and I put a lot of water, and then these mushrooms grew, and they're edible, and they're very good, and they are the mushroom that Paul Stamets first saw honeybees going to and getting at the mycelium, in the mycelium that was growing in the stuff. And then he had the idea of doing research on finding out if mushrooms, enzymes and things, or whatever is in mushrooms, can help with the bee metabolism and keep them from getting the mites. And he's doing a lot of research on that. Sorry, I didn't even cover that. There's a lot of awesome stuff with mushrooms and health. So, anyway. Yeah, those look cool. They don't always look that great, but
How big are they? It's hard to tell.
those are probably like maybe
Holy
that.
moly.
That one
Oh
right
my
there.
gosh. They are big.
Yeah, and if you get them right here before they get huge, and the thing is, these mushrooms are called the garden giant, sometimes a wine cap, but they're called a garden giant because however deep you make your bed, like there's a ratio of how deep it is to how big the mushroom's going to get. So if you have a 3-foot mushroom, or a 3-foot deep bed, then it might be like a big mushroom like that. And you can garden up and grow them, and then they basically turn whatever you put down there, wood chips. There's a free pile of wood chips from the city, and you can just back your truck up and pull it up. And these grow on basically they're great because they are voracious, and they'll grow on almost any type of wood, which a lot of mushrooms are pretty finicky. Okay, well, do you guys have any questions? I think that's the last one, yeah.
Very good.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate it.